4 syringes laid out in a row on a phone screen. That is the image Serena Williams chose to post from Wimbledon this year, the fluid drained straight from her right knee after 3 sets against a 20-year-old named Maya Joint. Not a highlight, not a trophy shot. A medical photograph captioned in her own words posted the way an athlete posts something they want people to actually understand rather than admire. Not a farewell tour, not a nostalgia lap dressed up as a comeback, not a victory lap at all, a genuine unfinished attempt to compete again, one that just hit a wall in real time. Bigger than one match at Wimbledon, bigger than one knee, bigger than the hardware of a return, this is about whether the greatest comeback story in tennis this year still has a second chapter, or whether it quietly ends in a training room in Toronto. Here is the thesis. For weeks, the assumption around this sport was that Serena Williams would walk straight from her Wimbledon singles return into the Canadian Open, the first WTA 1000 event of the North American hardcourt swing. That assumption was wrong. The Canadian Open has now handed out its final singles wildcards, and her name is not on the list. This is not a confirmation that she is playing. It is a confirmation that, for now, she is not. Before you write this off as bad news, you need to understand something about how these decisions actually get made, because it changes what "not now" really means. A wildcard is not a formality. A WTA 1000 event has a fixed number of direct entries by ranking, and Serena Williams, at 44 years old and more than 4 years removed from a full schedule, has no ranking that gets her into that field on merit. Her entire comeback runs through invitations, which means every tournament has to weigh a former world #1's box office draw against the physical reality of a knee that was, days earlier, having fluid drained from it on camera. Toronto looked at that trade and for singles said not yet. The final 2 spots went to Canadian players Carol Zhao and Ariana Arseneault, alongside Bianca Andreescu, Kayla Cross, Rebecca Marino, Catherine Seeboff, and Cadence Brace, a list built almost entirely around giving home fans someone to follow through the draw. One more name made that list, her own sister. This was never a one-tournament decision to begin with. Once Wimbledon wrapped, the reporting on her comeback already had Toronto and Cincinnati marked as the preparatory stretch before New York, not the finish line. Tennis Channel's Jon Wertheim, who has covered this buildup as closely as anyone, describes Cincinnati as close to mandatory for both Williams sisters before they get to the U.S. Open. That single line reframes what just happened in Toronto. Missing a Canadian singles wildcard is not the collapse of a comeback. It is one closed door in a schedule that always had more than one entrance planned, and the schedule itself was always built around New York, not around any one warm-up stop along the way. Venus Williams received a singles wildcard into the Canadian Open. Serena Williams did not. Sit with that for a second because it reframes the whole story. This was never really about whether organizers believe in the Williams name, since one sister is already in the draw. It is about whether one specific knee is ready, and right now the honest answer from the people closest to it is that nobody knows yet. The numbers around this comeback are still extraordinary even in a pause. 23 major singles titles. A former world #1 who had not played a competitive singles match in nearly 4 years, stepping back onto Wimbledon's grass for a first-round tie against Maya Joint, a 20-year-old ranked nowhere near the top of the sport when they met. The scoreline itself told a story of its own, 6-3, 6-7, 6-3, 3 sets deep, competitive to the very end rather than a ceremonial straight sets exit, the kind of match where the older player was still dictating points deep into the 3rd set. That loss was not the headline. What happened 4 days later was. Williams was fit enough to take the court again for doubles alongside Venus, then withdrew before the match started, the toll of the singles finally catching up with the knee that carried her through it. She explained it herself, and there was no spin in it. I'm heartbroken to have to withdraw from doubles. Coming back to compete again has been a gift, and the opportunity to play alongside Venus once more meant the world to me. I did everything I could to be ready, but unfortunately my knee just isn't ready to compete. That is not the language of someone quitting. That is the language of someone who ran out of runway for one specific week, and who is choosing to say so plainly rather than let the withdrawal speak for itself in an era where most athletes let a press release do that talking for them. Tennis Canada is not closing the door either. Valerie Tetreault, the tournament's vice president, put it plainly when asked where things stand. We are still in discussions with her team. We are monitoring the recovery of her injury on a daily basis. No decision has been made for Serena Williams. Read that again. Discussions are ongoing. The door in Toronto is not shut, it is ajar, and a doubles appearance alongside Venus is still described as possible even though the singles wildcards are gone, which is exactly the kind of detail that gets lost the moment a headline turns a pause into a verdict. So where does that leave the actual comeback? Cincinnati is still on the table, so is the US Open itself, the tournament that has hosted more of her defining nights than any other, and the one every person around this story is quietly treating as the real target. A wild card into Flushing Meadows would not need to be earned through Toronto form. It would need a knee that can hold up for best of 3 then best of 5 on the sport's biggest hardcourt stage against a field that will not offer her the mercy of an easy opener the way a first-round draw sometimes can. That is the actual stakes here, not a Canadian Open storyline that was never confirmed in the first place. The real test was always going to be New York, and the reporting around her camp already treats a US Open appearance as close to settled, in singles potentially, in doubles alongside Venus again, and with talk of a mixed doubles pairing with Carlos Alcaraz drawing attention from well outside the usual tennis audience. That last detail alone tells you how large this comeback has already grown beyond one withdrawn wildcard in Toronto, pulling in a crossover audience that does not normally track a WTA schedule at all. Everything after the US Open is genuinely open. Whether this becomes a full second act on tour or one final deliberate lap through the tournament that has defined her career the most depends entirely on how a 44-year-old knee responds to best of 3 then best of 5 on hard courts in August heat under conditions that punish exactly the kind of long baseline exchanges that built her career. Toronto was just the first week where the body said no before the calendar could say yes, and it will not be the last week that question gets asked. So the next time you see a headline claiming her comeback is already decided one way or the other, remember what actually happened this week. Not a confirmation, not a collapse. A pause explained honestly by the people closest to it, while the calendar keeps moving toward the one tournament that always mattered most. Because some comebacks do not announce themselves on a schedule. Some of them wait for a knee to catch up with a will that never left.